A Shalom Hakim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rakakodash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth and citations to the sincere Akim and Aquath and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Requai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of wanted to read through this article here in regards to the Caribbean rum distillers and essentially their struggle with the industry's future as Trump continues to impose tariffs, right? So we're just looking at examining, how Trump, is essentially affecting the economies of other nations. The nation may indirectly be doing business, with Babylon the Great, aka America, right? So I just wanted to read through this, and I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson is edifying, right? So essentially, you have a lot of these Caribbean rum distillers, and what's pretty much they're starting to feel the pinch, right? So as a matter of fact, because I said that, let me read. Where was I? Let me start off with this precept here, right? Because a lot of our people are in a spirit of what's it called? Not just mirth per se, but mirth also included, but economic and business and so on and so forth. But essentially what has caused them, a lot of the comforts in Babylon, even having your own, businesses has essentially, and making lots of money, has distracted Jake from the real spiritual problem. So I will start off with this precept here and I'll get right into the article, right? So this is Isaiah 55 verse 6. And it says, "Seek ye the Lord Yahweh Bashnel Shai while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. And let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him." Because we're in a position where we sinned against the Lord, and, we need mercy. And sometimes, Jake does not see, that we that's another part of it, we messed up, right? So we need a covering, so and it says, "And to our power he will abundantly pardon," right? So so without further ado, let me just jump right into the article. So here it says, I guess I'll start here. So it says, I'll just jump around, and it says, "Those tariffs that President Trump has imposed on China, Canada, and Japan also include the rum producing and exporting island nations of the Caribbean." So this is a quote, and it says, "Miami being the number one rum market in the world, we are dealing with every it says county, that should probably say country in the Caribbean, South America, and beyond." Okay, so it says, the Caribbean rum distillers are struggling with what lies ahead for their industry, which already has thin profit margins. The Caribbean rum market is estimated to be worth between $600 million and $1 billion. For example, rum exports add around $145.3 million to the Jamaican economy. So essentially, rum or alcohol, it plays a huge role in a lot of these smaller nations, mostly where Jake is situated in the Caribbean islands. It plays a role in it's a popular export, which adds to the, the, the welfare of that particular country's economy. So there are some islands that have some, what's it called? Some, I don't want to say unusual, but some unique exports. Like for example, you have like Trinidad, they have more oil reserves, they have some petroleum reserves, and so on and so forth. And then you have some other islands that have more spices. And then, but one of the more common, popular exports amongst like all the greater Antilles and the lesser Antilles, the bigger islands and the smaller islands, is the fact that one, they either rely a lot on alcohol or rum, or they rely on tourism. That's another thing also. But for the sake of this lesson, we'll talk about, the rum and the alcohol, because not only does it play a huge role into that country's, economic, portfolio, wine and rum is one of those things that makes a man glad, so to speak, right? As a matter of fact, I kind of want to get that in Ecclesiasticus. This is Ecclesiasticus chapter 31. I was turning to verse 27, and it says, "Wine is as good as life to a man, if it be drunk moderately. What life is then to a man that is without wine? For it was made to make men glad. Wine measurably drunk in season bringeth gladness of heart and cheerfulness of mind." Right? So that's one of the things that alcohol can do. It can, it gives you, it lightens you up a little bit, because, Jake has been under a situation so long where, they to essentially try and escape, what's in front of them, they will cling to the bottle. They might, you might do those things. But they go too far in the sense of being too much in the house of mirth, right? To the point where it's distracting and taking your minds away, too far away from the real problem of what's going on here. That you're in a situation where you can still be affected by all these different tariffs and all these different situations. So now they're really starting to, basically sober up in a not in a physical sense, but sober up to the reality of you being in subjection, and you being basically feeling the pinch from your economic endeavors, right? So here it says, continuing on, so this is a quote that somebody said, "It is hard enough to get their products in the U.S. market, to get consumer sentiment towards rum to promote the spirit, and to have this come along," says Alexander Brittle, the founder and editor of one of the online Caribbean journal. "So the 10% tariff will hurt, especially smaller distilleries and distributors." It says, "So unless the president changes his mind, he is prone to doing, Caribbean rum distillers would face reduced profit margins, forcing price increases, job losses, slower economic growth, and reduced shipments, resulting in potential shortages of rum on American retail liquor store shelves," right? So it's affecting not only the people who are supplying it, but it's also going to affect the people who are actually, purchasing it also. Because from their perspective, what's going to happen? You may not be selling, so the rum, you ship it off to the United States to appear on United States and liquor shelves. So now, as it's in the United States market, it's a lot more expensive than when it was sold on your own local soil. So now you have to might increase, so some distillers might think, okay, let me increase the price, right? So now the people within Babylon start to feel the pinch, right? Or, you might keep the prices the same and not change anything, but then you run the risk of now you're losing profits. You now run the risk of, okay, you know what, let me start to cut back on the employees that I have. I don't really need that many employees anymore. Let me, what I'm saying? Like they start to make certain cuts. Maybe this distillery we can close down this location and let's just, kind of amalgamate and combine services and essentially kind of dwindle things down. So what we see now is a grinding starting to cease. There's a lot of job opportunities that are now being lost, because things are becoming a lot more expensive than they used to be, right? Because of these whole tariff situations. So this situation of these countries doing business with the whore, doing business with Babylon the Great, it's starting to affect their own economic welfare, right? So since I mentioned that, let me go to this is Revelation chapter 6, verse 6. And it says, "And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts saying, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine," right? So when you go into that word, the penny, it refers to, in the Greek, I believe it says denarion. Hold on, let me just double check it real quick. Okay, so here the Greek word is denarion. So it goes into the coin. It refers to the coin known as the denarius. So just to hit you brothers with a little bit of history, denarius here it says was the primary silver coin during the time of the Roman Empire, right? So, and it's funny too, it was primarily composed of over 90% silver. Now during the reign of Emperor Nero, that coin began to debase. He began to debase the coin, which means that the coin started to lose its value, right? He started to mix it with other inferior metals. So what does that do? You start to have essentially a stretching of the money, right? And it causes things to become a lot more expensive, right? The money doesn't hold as much value as it used to anymore, right? So this is what's starting to occur, with countries that are doing business with America. A lot of the services and products that certain countries provide, like it mentioned Canada, it mentioned China, it mentioned even Caribbean islands, with Trump using and placing a lot of these tariffs on these other countries. His objective is to think, oh, okay, America first, our people first, but now it's creating a position where things are going to be a lot more expensive. So things are going to be a lot more expensive for you people that are on American soil to actually purchase these products, to keep their products in their store shelves, right? Because his mindset is, okay, you go buy something that is locally made as opposed to buying the competitor's price, and that competitor is not located in America. So now it's starting to become where things are becoming a lot more expensive, right? It's starting to cost a lot more than a day's wage to essentially purchase something, right? And where the precept says, hurt not the oil and the wine, representing this truth and this understanding. Because when you really think about it, our people have strongly prioritized in acquiring a lot of physical riches rather than acquiring spiritual riches. When our people our people are very entrepreneurial. That's another point I wanted to make here, Our people are very, very talented and very entrepreneurial. Now, what has what have they forgotten? They have forgotten Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. That's most important. It's because now losing businesses, they basically have became like the man in the parable of the rich fool. He began to invest very heavily into his storehouses, into his physical storehouses. I'm gonna build bigger barns. I'm gonna open this location. I want to open a new distillery. We're gonna get some more new employees, this and that and the third, without actually investing in a healthy relationship with Yahweh Bashim Shai. That's why in the parable it says, "You fool, you will die tonight," right? So it's more important for our people to actually get that not that physical, I'm sorry, that spiritual bread, that bread of understanding. As a matter of fact, here's my apocrypha. Hold on. I think it says that in Ecclesiasticus. Just bear with me 1 second. Let me find it. Where is it? Just bear with me. It's 32, 14. Okay, this is Sirach 15. Verse 3, and it says, "With the bread of understanding she shall she feed him, and give him water of wisdom to drink." Right? So our people are basically, they have the spiritual, not the spiritual bread, they have the physical bread, and not that spiritual bread on how to actually pivot and maneuver when these sorts of times occur. They don't have spiritual riches stored up in heaven to be able to kind of like I don't want to say how do I say it, they don't have that spiritual riches to be able to I don't want to say, it's basically like rainy day money, right? That water of wisdom to be able to quench their thirst. They're basically drinking from cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. These different religions, these different philosophies, Rastafarianism or Christianity and so on and so forth. It doesn't actually give our people the proper understanding how to navigate these times, right? Okay, let me go back to the article here. Okay, so so it says U.S. rum distributors who import and bottle Caribbean bulk rum shipped into the U.S. Worry about another tariff impact. A healthy number of distributors bottle their product in glass bottles produced in China, which are subject to hefty Chinese export tariffs, right? So it's basically you're kind of screwed, right? Whether you're doing business with China or you're doing business with the U.S. So it says, okay, so what does this mean for short term for U.S. consumers at a local liquor store or favorite tiki bar? It says, this is a quote, and it says, "I think you are going to see a nominal increase." Brittle said, I'm sure it is going to be anything significant. I'm not sure, I'm sorry, it's going to be anything significant. It might be priced in, not going to notice at least it in the short term, right? So here, just furthering on, it says, okay, so Bird told CBS News Miami that rum produced in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Island are exempt, because those are, that's part of the United States like hegemony, right? as those islands are U.S. territories, there are no tariffs for products from the USA, right? So it's pretty much countries where U.S. doesn't have a foothold in, right? But going back to the point, it shows you that our people who have these different businesses, and they're supplying and they're doing business with these Caribbean, with American, with America as a whole. You're starting to suffer now, because you're now essentially you're subject to jacking up the price. You're subject to doing these different things, right? You might have to, I don't know, cut corners, right? And having a business is pretty much like pseudo salvation. And when I say pseudo, I mean it's a false salvation that our people have heavily invested into, that's actually not yielding them any much rewards, right? You've used this, a lot of our people use this avenue of having their own business, and I'm not knocking that. I'm knocking really more so the mentality of essentially trying to escape, kind of circumvent the curses, to basically try and establish something for yourself. But now you're being there's tariffs being placed on by Americans, and then realize that tariffs are being placed on by the Chinese, right? So you're kind of damned, and in every different, you're kind of cornered. And Jake doesn't see that, it's pretty much Yahweh Bashim Yashai doing this on purpose to show you that you've ignored the Lord as a whole. You can't circumvent the curses, right? You still have to go to your enemies for the want of all things, right? Let me get another precept here. Okay, this is the book of Haggai, chapter 1. I'll start at verse 5. And it says, "Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." And that's one of the main things that our people don't consider. They don't consider their ways of what they're doing is essentially, our ways have been very displeasing in the eyes of Yahweh Bashim Shai. That's why we're in this position, and the Lord put curses upon us, scattered us, and now we're in a situation where we're still subject to payments. Now I don't want to say even things have gotten more comfortable, but Jake has essentially been so comfortable with being in subjection under the heathens, to the point where they've basically forgotten the fact that they're in subjection. They're in, different contractual slavery, right? The slavery never went away. It's just revamped, recycled, and now it's repolished, things. So basically, you have to go into a physical job. You have to clock into this place. You still have to pay taxes, even if you do have a business. You need to have a tax. Like in Canada, for example, you need to have an HST number. You have to pay tribute unto Caesars, right? So you can't really escape, this the predicament that you're in, just because you have a business. Jake doesn't consider their ways, and consider the fact that our ways, the Lord did, these ways are displeasing towards the Heavenly Father, right? This verse 6, and here's the point, and it says, "Ye have sown much, and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it in a bag of holes." So, it shows you that, with the Jake, as much as they're trying to sow and try to better themselves through this different avenue of pseudo salvation, trying to, have their own businesses, and we are when you get the businesses, we're gonna buy up the block and this and that and the fourth. It doesn't yield as much as it's supposed to, because the Lord is making your lives harder for you deliberately, right? It's showing you need to turn back to the Heavenly Father through His Son, right? You can't navigate through this valley of shadow of death without Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? You like, imagine that you put your earning wages, and your earning wages went in a bag of holes, right? So you earn some money, right? So even if from their perspective as a distiller, you earn a certain amount of money, then this person has to get their cut, and that person has to get their cut, right? And then you're left with very, very little at the end of the day for yourself. You're sowing so much, but your rewards are you're reaping very little. You're not getting, the your dollar doesn't stretch as far. It goes, and it basically dissipates, right? And so it says, verse 7, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. And that's the part and the main crux of the issue. Jake does not consider, their ways. They don't consider what they have done. They don't consider their own history. Like it says in Isaiah chapter 1, an ox knoweth his owner, and an ass his master's crib. But my people doth not know. They don't consider, to roughly paraphrase, they don't consider, what's, these things, right? Even the animals, for example, the animals that, consider and notice when certain signs in the heavens and, the weather starts to change. And so their behavior patterns start to change. But Jake's, especially like in the Caribbean, Jake, because the sun is, the weather's always good, they always have music playing, they always have, their wine and alcohol is very, very easily and a lot easier to be accessed, down there, right? So everybody, they're kind of more in the house of mirth, to the point where they're forgotten their situation. They're forgotten that the Lord is putting them in a situation where He's making your life harder for you, right? So what's the solution? The solution is to turn back to the Lord, right? But that's pretty much it. I kind of just want to touch on that. As a matter of fact, I guess I'll close off with this one. This is Psalms chapter 37, verse 25. Excuse me. And it says, I have been young, and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. He is ever merciful, and lendeth, and his seed is blessed. Depart from evil and do good, and dwell forevermore. Right? So, it shows you there is a benefit in being upright and being righteous. Sorry, I try to combine those two. There's a benefit, because now you have spiritual riches stored up for you. For example, when this is an example, when Tobit was burying the dead, those alms, those good deeds that he performed, even though he was suffering, he had I think it was a bird that pooped in his eye. Even though he was suffering, right? The Lord, used the angel Raphael to be able to come back to his aid and heal him, because he had spiritual riches stored up. He walked in an upright fashion, even in the midst of his captivity, right? So, but Jake doesn't see the importance of walking upright in captivity, and a lot of them don't even know that they're in captivity. They're actually, the whole joke is that they think they're free, And what's it? I think it's next month they go and they celebrate what's it called? I think it's called Juneteenth on June 19th and stuff like that. Jake, that's a snare when you really think about it, because Jake celebrates this thing, thinking that they're free and they're not, right? So just to show you there's perks in being righteous, right? The Lord can remember you, in times of trouble. The scriptures say that riches profit not in a day of wrath, but righteousness can deliver from death. So the riches that you acquire, through the business and so on, our people don't have that spiritual mindset to be like, oh man, let me use these riches to acquire spiritual riches, because this can all pass away, right? I can't rely on this for salvation, so to speak. But Jake heavily invests in it, to think that it's going to offer them some sort of salvation, right? It merely offers you a pseudo salvation. It's false. It's not real, right? It's more advantageous to have spiritual riches, right? But anyways, I'll leave the lesson there. But I just thought I would just make a quick couple points on that. I didn't want to make the lesson too long. But hopefully, this video was edifying. I just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.